enter a set of whoops at that speed, I don't cringe because I'm like, oh, they'll be fine. Because they know to stay in that position no matter what.
I met a gypsy.
But yeah, like that was the first thing that Townley said to me, just like fully changed like the attack position for me. And I could not believe the extra travel that you'd get suspension wise out of your ankles. Like it felt weird, and then like I could put weight in different areas, and I was having like I'd go right hand turn, my right heel would drop a little bit more because there's a bit more weight in it. Like it just completely changed riding for me. And now when I ride, my first thing every time I'll reset my body positioning, I'm just like on my toes, gripping with the knees, and it's something that I've tried to make into a habit, but it's a fucking game changer. And if you look like another thing, I don't know, it's probably cool to ask you about, but one of the things, like I've studied a bunch of footage of Sexton riding. Like I get on YouTube, I slow it right down, and I watch his technique. I've also noticed his knee line is never over the front arch of his ankle. It's like, so his knees are always, his kneecap would always be behind like that front arch.
Mm-hmm. That when I put my students on the stand, I tell them balls of your feet, toes pointed in. The next thing I always say, go through the checklist in your head from your feet to your head, right? So you got balls of your feet, toes pointed in. Very next thing is knees level with or behind the foot pegs. There's exceptions to it. Like if you're hitting a really short and steep obstacle where you kind of let your knees blow forward for a second in certain situations, that's the exception.
So the knees, so that's the one thing I did notice. The knees would come forward when he was like scrubbing and stuff. You're kind of like pushing the knees like towards the radiators kind of. But yeah, like pretty much as soon as Sexton would stand up, he would shift his knees all the way back as far as he could, get the hips back, and then like bend at his spine.
Yep. Yeah. So it's like a hip hinge, and your knees stay back, and then you hinge from the hips to get your chest forward. That's the hard part. So, and that's what happens. I say, okay, get your knees back. And as soon as I do that, my students will go like this, whoop, and they'll extend their arms back because, that's kind of what feels natural to them. So the tricky part is keeping the knees back no matter what. And what's helpful is if you have a seat with ribs on it, you can usually use one of the ribs as a gauge. So like every once in a while, if you're just getting used to it, look down and be like, okay, my knees shouldn't go in front of the second rib on my seat. Or you just look at your foot pegs. If you look down, you can't see your tippy toes and you can't see your foot pegs, your knees are too far forward. So drive the knees back, but then your head has to stay forward. So I always tell my students, if you're doing it right, you should feel a heck of a stretch in your hamstring. If you're doing it wrong, you're going to feel the weight in your quads and in your shins because your knees are in front of your toes. Sexton is probably the most picture perfect attack position if you could ever draw it up. Roczen is probably the best footwork in the corners, although Sexton's pretty darn close. But Sexton and Roczen are two guys to really like, if you're going to emulate style, watch those guys.
Yeah. One thing I noticed, going kind of jumping around, but going back to this weekend, one of the things that I noticed, there was one lap through the whoops where, and I don't know whether it was tired or whether it was like mentally Coop broke him, but man, Roczen completely lost his attack position in the whoops, and his arms were going like that. Like it wasn't necessarily like the bike stayed straight and he was still going through the whoops, but he lost that attack position completely. And I don't know what the factor was, but man, it's definitely like, since I've really been like paying attention to that technique and that specific attack position, man, you could see the point in the main event where Kenny lost that.
Yeah, and in the whoops, and that's the beauty of the attack position, is you utilize it everywhere. Anytime your butt's off the seat, standing up. It is the same position. It's the same position to jump 5 feet are 105 feet. It's the same position to go through a set of sand rollers or a set of Supercross whoops. It's all the same. So usually 2 mistakes in the whoops. So one, either you would get your head too far back and try to lean too far off the back, which then just creates an uneven motorcycle, and then you end up doing the old teeter-totter. Or if you hesitate a little bit too much on the entry, well, this can happen a couple different ways. Either that, or if you just straight up just get too much wheel spin, it's easy to allow your knees to cave forward and your whole lower half to kind of go too far forward, which then same thing. It'll kind of create that teeter-totter effect. And in whoops, it doesn't take much. Like you mess up that position for just one of the 12 whoops, and you've basically screwed yourself the whole rest of them. I mean, because it's so precise. You have to keep a level plane, so then you can hit the very top inch or two of every single whoop with the front and the rear tire. As soon as your body position's out of shape, left, right, forward, back, you're not hitting that exact point on the whoop.
Yeah.
And so there's no coincidence why the guys with the best attack position are the guys that go the best through the whoops, right?
Jet Lawrence.
Yeah. Oh man. And watching Hunter Lawrence in the whoops, him and Jet look pretty identical, and they can trust their entry speed because their attack position is so good.
Yeah.
That they can enter as fast as they want. The guys that get a little squirrely attack position wise and get scared and come out of position, or just don't have it dialed as good as Jet and Hunter do, would get themselves killed 50% of the time coming into the whoops. But every time I watch Jet and Hunter, same thing with Christian Craig, enter a set of whoops at that speed, I don't cringe because I'm like, oh, they'll be fine. Because they know to stay in that position no matter what.
If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. And to listen to the full 3-hour podcast, search Gypsy Tales in your favorite podcast platform or click the link in the description below. Gypsy Gang.